Hello, I'm taking on a challenge to beat every playable Nintendo published game. Welcome to the next episode. The next game is Dragon Warrior. Dragon Warrior, originally called Dragon Quest in Japan, was developed by Chunsoft and published by Enix in Japan. While not the original publishers of the title, Nintendo hoped to publish its overseas release. Because of this one is a bit similar to 10 Yard Fight in that it wasn't actually published by Nintendo for its initial release. While I did have some reservations about including 10 Yard Fight, this one really feels like the first time where I questioned whether or not I should be categorizing the title as a Nintendo game. If you were to ask me whether or not I consider Dragon Quest to be a Nintendo game or an Enix game, I would certainly say an Enix game. However, Nintendo did play a big role in bringing the game to the West, and at the very least, I think games like this showcase what sort of companies Nintendo worked with closely during this era. In Japan, Dragon Quest was a huge hit, and while it's definitely not the first RPG from Japan, many consider it to be the father of the JRPG genre, as it established many standards that became staple for JRPGs. Of course, whether or not you think all RPGs from Japan should be labeled as JRPGs will affect your opinions on this, but I'll refrain from being too opinionated on the topic myself, and I'll let you decide on your own whether or not you think this one should truly be considered the very first JRPG. In fact, Dragon Quest wasn't even Enix's first RPG. Before this, Enix published the Earthfighter Ryza, a sci-fi RPG that released on home computers in 1985. This game even eventually got a Famicom port too, and we'll actually see it later on in the challenge, as the Famicom version was published by Nintendo. So, how did Enix and Chunsoft end up teaming up to make such a historic title? Well, there are a handful of key people that led to the development of this title that I want to touch on. The first of these is Yasuhiro Fukushima. Fukushima was an architect that decided he wanted to start his own business, and he founded the company Aidensha Boshu Service Center. His initial plans for the company were to publish advertising tabloids for real estate. As part of this venture, he also created the fully owned subsidiary Aidensha Fudosan, which specialized in real estate trading and brokerage. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, why am I even talking about this company? What does real estate have to do with video games? Well, this is because his plans to become a nationwide chain ended in failure, and he decided to completely shift gears to a new market that was on the rise. This market was none other than video games. He renamed the subsidiary Enix and decided that he needed to find new talent to get his company off the ground. To do this, Fukushima organized a competition where the winners would earn prize money and a chance to have their game published by Enix. From this event, there were two winners that caught the attention of Enix, Yuji Horii and Koichi Nakamura. Horii was the writer of a video game column in the weekly Shonen Jump magazine, and his game, Love Match Tennis, was one of the winners of the competition. Horii discovered his love of video game design through this competition, and he would go on to be the main designer for Dragon Quest, and he still works on the franchise as a lead designer to this day. Another key designer that rose from this competition was Nakamura, who was in his last year of high school during the competition. Nakamura was a video game enthusiast at a young age and was already programming his own games when he was still in high school. His game, Door Door, was another winner, and his success led him to start his own video game company fresh out of high school named Chunsoft. Apparently, Nakamura was a big fan of Mahjong, and he played a lot of it in high school. One of his friends even called him Chun, based off the Japanese name for the red dragon tile, which is where the name for his company comes from. Chunsoft would proceed to work closely with Enix as programmers for many of their titles. The first game Horii and Nakamura worked on together was a visual novel adventure game for Enix, the Portopia serial murder case. While they were developing it, they came up with an idea for their next game, which would become Dragon Quest. Horii and Nakamura discovered Western RPG PC games like Wizardry and Ultima, and they wanted to expand the genre to the Japanese market. RPGs were largely PC dominant at this point, but Horii and Nakamura wanted to expand the game to an audience that went beyond PC gamers. They decided to develop the game for the Famicom, although they knew they would have to simplify certain elements to make it work on a simpler controller. They also made the decision to design the game with the assumption that its players were not familiar with Dungeons & Dragons, so they made things a bit simpler than many of the PC RPGs at the time. During the development of this game, there were two other contributors that came on board that I want to talk about. First of these was its composer, Koichi Sugiyama. Sugiyama was a well-known composer in Japan who had done work for musicals, commercials, pop songs, movies, and TV shows. He apparently reached out to Enix with a feedback postcard about one of their PC games, and after receiving the letter, Enix reached out back to Sugiyama to see if he wanted to compose video game music for them. Sugiyama accepted the offer and continued to compose music for the Dragon Quest franchise until his death in 2021. While his classical pieces would become a staple for the franchise, Sugiyama himself was a controversial figure. Sugiyama was a council member for the Japanese Society for the Rights of Authors, Composers, and Publishers, and this organization is known for being pretty strict when it comes to copyright. Sugiyama himself was known for owning all of the Dragon Quest music and being very protective of it. One of his more infamous tactics was that he would make full orchestrated versions of the Dragon Quest soundtracks, but he wouldn't allow Enix to use them in the games. Instead, Enix would have to use synthesized versions of the songs. To hear the orchestrated versions, you would need to buy his album separately. Additionally, Sugiyama was very active politically, and his stances have led many to dislike him as a person. The final major person I want to talk about was the artist Akira Toriyama. Many of you will probably recognize Toriyama as he was the creator of the Dragon Ball franchise. At the time, Dragon Ball was still fairly early on in its publication. Toriyama was apparently brought onto the Dragon Quest project without even really knowing what an RPG was. His work on the game made his schedule hectic, but he was happy to be a part of the final project, and he continued to do the art for the franchise going forward. With this team of individuals, the game was created and ready to launch in Japan. Initially, its sales were a bit slow, however, over time the game picked up steam and it was eventually considered to be a pretty big hit. The franchise would only continue to grow in Japan from that point onward, and the series remains a cultural icon in Japan to this day. I personally recall talking with someone from Japan who was visiting America, and he told me that he didn't really play video games, yet he had played every single one of the Dragon Quest games. It took a while, but with the success of the game in Japan, it eventually saw a port to the NES in the West almost 3 years later. This is where Nintendo themselves finally entered the story. Nintendo decided that they would help with the publishing of this game in the West, and apparently they were even involved with the localization efforts, as Hori has stated that Satoru Iwata himself did the localization programming for the title in the West. The game received some enhancements for the Western release too. Many of the sprites were upgraded, and they added battery-powered saving, whereas the Japanese version only featured passwords. The final big change was to the name itself. Apparently they went with Dragon Warrior to avoid infringing on the trademark used by a pen and paper RPG at the time that was also named Dragon Quest. For later re-releases of the game though, they just went back to calling it Dragon Quest in the West. However, I am officially playing the Dragon Warrior version for this challenge, so that is the name I will often use to refer to the title, even if it doesn't feel quite right. One thing that actually slightly confused me is that we can see on the title screen that the name Dragon Warrior is actually a trademark of Nintendo and not Enix. However, while Nintendo didn't publish any of the future games that used the Dragon Warrior title, Enix still used that name for the Western releases for quite a while. I think at some point the trademark was transferred to Enix, although I'm not an expert with this stuff, so I'm not totally sure how it all works. Unfortunately, the game never took off in the West quite as well as it did in Japan. The game did poorly enough in the US that they even included the game for free to subscribers of Nintendo Power. While the series eventually did grow in popularity in the West, it still hasn't really gotten as popular as it is in Japan. However, the impact of the game would be felt in the US with time, as it inspired many other games that did far better overseas, such as the Final Fantasy franchise. Dragon Warrior was the only classic Dragon Quest game to be published by Nintendo, so we unfortunately won't get to see any of the other NES and SNES titles, at least not in their original format. However, once the franchise returned to Nintendo consoles on the DS, we'll start to see them come back, as Nintendo eventually started to help with publishing the franchise overseas once again. Alright, with that, let's take a look at my time with the game. I've played the mobile port on the Switch, but never the original. This game starts you as a warrior talking with a king. This guy is apparently King Lorik XVI, and he rules the lands known as Alifgard. He told me that I am the descendant of an ancient hero named Erdrick. Many years ago, Erdrick fought demons with an object called the Ball of Light, and after Erdrick's triumph, he left the Ball of Light with the ancient king of Alifgard, King Lorik I. However, now, an evil being known as the Dragon Lord has stolen the Ball of Light, and it is up to me to defeat the Dragon Lord and retrieve the Ball of Light from his clutches. In this first room, there's some chests with some goodies, and one of these is a magic key which is needed to leave the room. Something a little annoying in this game is that you need to go through a menu to do anything. There's an option to open doors, an option to take items from chests, an option to talk, and even an option to go downstairs. It's definitely a little tedious, but I'll cut the game some slack for being one of the first ones to try something like this on a console. Apart from sending you on your initial quest, the king serves another interesting role in this game. Talking to him is the only way to save. I'm guessing in the Japanese version he would just tell you your password or something. Even saving is a little tedious in this though. He yaps on about saving your deeds in a scroll of honor, and he asks you both if you want to save and if you want to continue playing, requiring you to make 2 different choices every time you want to save. After this, I explored the castle and learned some valuable information. Apparently, the princess, Gwaelin, is missing, and there's a nearby town where I could find supplies. I also talked to this old guy who made the screen flash white for some reason. I'm honestly not sure what this actually does. There's some chests here, but they're all behind a bunch of locked doors, and I don't have any more of those magic keys. Bummer. After leaving the castle, I got a brief glimpse of the overworld. However, I wanted to stop by the nearby town first. This town is called Breckenary, and it's right next to the castle. Here, I bought a club and some clothes at the shop. Apparently, in this game, you'll automatically equip whatever you buy, so there's no way to have multiple weapons in your inventory or anything. The game doesn't really tell you how good everything is either, although the manual helps you get a general idea for at least some of the gear. I didn't really want to try and experiment to figure out everything myself though, so I used a guide just to figure out what the stats were of all the equipment. I also got a few more clues about some of the neighboring towns and locations, including the location of the Dragon Lord's castle, which we can see to the south from the world map. Unfortunately though, I couldn't reach it yet. At this point, I decided to look around and maybe get some experience and gold while I'm at it. Something kind of interesting about this game is that you can go essentially anywhere on the map right away. Instead of gating areas based on the story, some areas will have harder enemies which naturally push you in an intended direction of where to go next. Of course, at any time, you can choose to be bold and brave the harder areas regardless of where they actually intended for you to go next. The first monster I encounter is not a normal slime, but a red slime. These were later renamed to she slimes, but unfortunately, this version of the game uses monster names that were eventually changed in later iterations of the series. It might be a bit confusing for some, but I'm just going to use the names provided by this version of the game. Man though, these slimes are quite the iconic enemy design. Even if you've never played a Dragon Quest, there's a good chance you've at least seen these things before. In general, the designs in this game lean more on the cartoony side. I've seen some people speculate that these lighthearted designs might be part of what makes this series struggle in the West, but personally, I like them. They are often pretty unique, and I think they have a lot of charm. Anyway, I beat this red slime with ease and proceeded to fight some more monsters. Another interesting thing about this title was that every battle is just a one-on-one. I'm not sure if this was due to technical limitations, or if it was just part of them wanting to keep the game simple. After fighting some monsters, I found a cave a bit to the north, and once I entered it, you can immediately see what the dungeons in this game are like. Pitch black. To see, you have to use a torch item, which will light the space around you for some time. Unfortunately, it only lights up the tiles immediately around you, and to make matters worse, the dungeons in this game are basically just mazy hallways that all look exactly the same. Honestly, I personally find the dungeons to be one of the weaker aspects of this game. They usually end up just being really annoying to traverse through. Anyway, after going down some stairs, here I found a tablet left by Erdrick himself. On this tablet, Erdrick explains that 3 items are needed to reach the Isle of Dragons, and he has given these 3 items to 3 worthy keepers whose families will protect the items until a descendant of Erdrick requires them again. I don't think you actually need to see this tablet or anything to progress the game, but I guess now I know I need to seek out these items wherever they actually are. Soon after leaving the cave, I lost all my HP to a bad enemy called the Drakey. When you die in this game, you don't return to a previous save, thankfully. However, you do end up losing half of your gold, and you get taken back to the castle. After this, I made my way to the north and found the town of Garenham. Here, I learned that the princess might have been captured, and people think she is trapped in a cave to the east. There was another shop here, but everything was super expensive. It kind of felt like I wasn't quite ready for this place yet. There was another locked door here too, and unfortunately, I still didn't have any more magic keys. At this point, I decided it was time to grind for some more levels and better gear. I did try pushing my luck to the east, but the enemies got pretty tough over there, and I didn't feel quite ready for them. However, after some time, I leveled up a bunch and bought better gear, so I decided to push eastward to the next settlement. Here, I found the village of Cole, and I found some more clues, including one that said I needed the fairy's flute to put a golem to sleep. Now, I actually remember the location of the flute from the mobile port. I think there's clues later on in the game for this, but you have to search a random tile in the town and you'll find the flute on the ground. Kinda brutal, really. Unfortunately, there's more locked doors here too, so with nothing left to do, I decided it was time to grind some more. By this point, I had started to learn some spells, such as a useful healing spell, as well as some other combat spells. While grinding, I found a temple with an old man who said he would give me the Staff of Rain if I gave him the silver harp. Huh? I don't know what either of these items even are. I guess the Staff of Rain must be important though. Anyway, I eventually made my way down south to a cave that was surrounded by swamps. The swamp tiles hurt you with each step, which was kinda rough. The cave was pretty tough too, and I eventually stumbled on a green dragon who did massive amounts of damage. I was clearly not ready for this guy, so I ran away. This is actually a scripted fight, and I can't even get past this tile without defeating him first. Thankfully, there's another way around him, but he must be guarding something. Anyway, I left the cave through a southern exit and ended up at a new section of the map. Phew, the enemies here are brutal. I remembered from my previous playthrough that there was a town down south, and if I could at least make it there, then I could rest at the inn. I was starting to run out of resources when I encountered a hard enemy on the last square before reaching the town. My first attempt to run failed, and I was brought down to only 2 more HP. However, I thankfully got away on the next attempt and made it safely to the town of Rimeldar. Here, I found some more clues. An old man told me that I need to create a rainbow to reach the Dragon Island, and that there's a secret path somewhere in the Dragon Lord's castle. Another guy told me that the Stone of Sunlight was hidden somewhere back at the very first castle. I'm not really sure what that is, but I guess I'll need to go back there and explore some more. Another old man told me about a temple where sun and rain meet. Maybe this has something to do with the rainbow I need to make? Anyway, hidden away in the corner of this town is a place where you can buy magic keys. Finally. Unfortunately, these aren't cheap, and they take up precious inventory space, so I might have to come back here for some more later. With these keys, it was time to return to the castle. I didn't have any money, so I just let the monsters defeat me so I could go back faster. Back at the castle, I opened some of the locked doors I found before. There was this annoying room with some chests that gave me less money than it cost to buy the key. That was definitely not worth it. On the right side, I found another guy who sells magic keys, although unfortunately his were more expensive. I also found a guy hiding behind some tiles that deal a ton of damage to you for some reason, and he told me about a secret passageway behind a wall in the town of Garenham to the northwest. Why does this castle even have these painful tiles anyway? After this, I tried going down to the southeast, but the enemies were a bit too tough, so I decided to grind some more. I already kind of felt like I was pushing my luck when I went through that swamp cave anyway. After gaining some more levels though, I decided to go back to that town across the swamp and try grinding around there. Something kind of funny happened during my grinding session here. I got messed up by this wolf enemy and I barely managed to run away. I decided to go back to the town to heal, but immediately on the next step I ran into the same wolf again. Thankfully, I was able to run away a second time safely at least. After getting some more keys, I decided to go back to the previous towns and open some more doors. Honestly, a lot of the rewards you get for this aren't really worth it. Look at this one here. All it unlocks are a couple of guards that just tell you to talk to the other guard. Come on, what a waste of a key. In Garenham though, I found that secret passageway in a house behind a locked door. There's a staircase down here to a dungeon, but I did something incredibly stupid. I walked too far and went past the stairs, which caused me to leave the town entirely. The reason this was so bad was that the doors in this game do not stay unlocked for some reason, so I completely wasted a key by doing this. To make matters worse, after using another key and going back in, the dungeon had another locked door and now I was out of keys. Because of this, I now needed to go all the way back to the town and buy 2 more keys, since I needed one to enter the house and another one to get through the dungeon. I like the idea of going back to the previous towns to find more secrets, but the fact that the doors lock again is kind of annoying. The enemies in this dungeon were pretty tough anyways, so I decided to explore down to the southwest first. Here I found another cave, and once again it's a dark maze with windy paths. There's honestly not that much even here, except for an item called the Fighter's Ring. Humorously, this ring essentially does absolutely nothing. Some people speculate whether or not it was intentional that this ring serves no purpose, or if it was just bugged. Oh, I also found this item called the Death Necklace here. Apparently this chest only has a 1 in 32 chance of giving you this item even. The item is cursed, so I threw it away, but apparently you can sell it for a lot of gold, which means I ended up squandering my good luck. After this, I got more magic keys, and I finally remembered that someone told me that there was the Stone of Sunlight in the castle, and I had forgotten to look for it. Behind a locked door, you can search around the edge of the castle and find a staircase to an old man who gives you the item. Looks like this is one of those 3 items that Erdrick was talking about on the stone tablet. Once I got that stone, I decided to try and fight the green dragon again, but I still wasn't ready and I got whooped by him. I guess it's time to grind again. After grinding a bunch, I decided to take on that dungeon in the back of Garenham again. This dungeon is actually pretty sizable and tough. Thankfully though, I had the spell of Radiant at this point, which lights up dungeons even better than the torch. Deep in here, I found the silver harp that the old guy in the north wanted. After leaving the dungeon and bringing him the harp, he rewarded me with the Staff of Rain. I guess this is the second one of those important items that Erdrick hid. After this, I went to the southeast corner where I found another old man and it looked like he was holding the final item. However, he kicked me out for some reason as he doubted I was truly the descendant of Erdrick. After this, I decided to grind some more and take on the green dragon once again. It was tough, but I finally managed to take him down. Behind the dragon, I found the lost princess, Gwaelin, and she requested that I take her back to the castle. I picked her up into my arms, and she then proclaimed how happy she was. At this point, my sprite changed to show me carrying the princess. After returning her to the king, the princess professed her love for the player, and she gave me an item that tells me how far away I am from the castle, as well as letting me check how much more experience I needed for the next level. It may not seem like that good of a reward, but it does have a use later on. Humorously, this is actually completely optional, and you can beat the entire game without ever rescuing her. After this, you can talk to the princess at any point and she will ask you if you love her. Saying yes will make her happy and a happy jingle plays in the background. Out of curiosity, I tried talking to her again and saying no this time. She insisted that I must love her and I was forced to make the choice again. Wow, I guess I don't really have a say in this, do I? After this, I grinded a bunch more and made my way southwest. Eventually, I found the final town, although it was guarded by a golem. Thankfully, I found that flute earlier, so I could make him sleep easily. Unfortunately, he eventually woke up and wiped me out anyway. Ouch. I got him the next time though, and I made it to the town of Cantlin. Here, there's a few more final equipment upgrades, as well as another old man hiding behind a bunch of dangerous tiles. This old man tells you to search for an exact spot on the map a certain distance away from the castle, which is where that item from the princess comes in handy. The enemies here are tough though, so I decided to wait on that. There's also a destroyed town here called Hawk's Nest, and it's swarming with super tough enemies. Deep in this town is a random spot where you'll encounter a brutal axe knight. Man, this guy is tough. I didn't stand a chance against him. I tried to beat him a few times, but I just couldn't do it. Instead, I decided to get that item hidden in the ground I mentioned before. It was hidden deep in some swamp tiles surrounded by hard enemies, but thankfully I managed to get it. The item is Erdrick's token, which was apparently proof that I truly was the descendant of Erdrick. I feel like just about anyone could have picked this up and claimed to be Erdrick's descendant, but oh well, I'll take it. With this token in hand, I returned to the old guy who kicked me out before, and this time he was willing to accept me as Erdrick's descendant. Here, he combined the Staff of Rain and the Sunstone to create the Rainbow Drop, which was the final item needed to reach the Dragon Lord's castle. Humorously, he's blocking a chest here, but you don't actually get the Rainbow Drop through it. Instead, he just hands you the Rainbow Drop when you talk to him, and you never get access to the chest. I guess this is the final item Erdrick left behind, although it seems more like it was just created now by combining the other two items, but whatever. Now, at this point, I could already go to the final dungeon, although I still wasn't quite ready for it. I hadn't defeated the knight in the abandoned town yet, and the final town had a really good shield that I hadn't bought. However, the best sword in the game can be found in the final dungeon, so I figured I would rush the dungeon, grab the sword, and then come back and use it to help me finish everything else up. On the peninsula, I used the Rainbow Drop to create a bridge, and it was time to visit the final dungeon. At first, it didn't seem like there was very much here. However, if you remember that clue from earlier, there's apparently a secret path somewhere in the castle. You need to search the ground way in the back on a bunch of those painful tiles that deal massive damage to reveal a secret staircase. Down through the stairs is an entire secret dungeon. As I made my way through it, I ran away from every encounter, but unfortunately this place was covered with brutal enemies. Remember that axe knight from before that I haven't even beaten yet? Well, they're normal encounters here, and one of them put me to sleep and messed me up. I lost all of my HP and I was sent back to the starting castle. Darn. I tried again, but I stupidly died on the painful tiles, not realizing that I needed to heal. Wow, what a dumb death. I made it further on the next run, but man, the enemies here are tough. I even ran into some dragons while I was down here. However, this time I finally got it. I found Erdrick's sword tucked away in a chest, and it's the best weapon in the game. Nice. Now that I had Erdrick's sword, it was once again time to see if I could beat that axe knight in Hawk's Nest. With this new weapon, I was finally able to take him down. At first, this doesn't seem to actually accomplish anything, but if you search the ground where you fought the knight, you'll find Erdrick's armor. Not only is this armor super strong, but it also heals you while you walk outside of battle. All I needed now was that silver shield in Cantlin. This is where the real grinding started to kick in. I picked a spot that occasionally spawned metal slimes, which are an infamous enemy in the Dragon Quest franchise. These are hard to hit, and they will often run away, but if you manage to defeat one, you get a ton of experience. I usually fail to defeat them, but with a few lucky hits, I did manage to defeat a handful of them during this time. After over an hour of grinding, I finally had enough money for the shield. At this point though, I still honestly wasn't sure if I was ready for the final dungeon yet. At level 17, you earn a better healing spell, so I decided to grind a bit more. After another hour and a half of grinding, I got to level 17 and earned the Heal More spell. Finally. Time to return to the final dungeon. I figured it probably wasn't worth fighting the enemies here since I wanted to conserve all my resources for the final boss. After running away from many powerful looking enemies, I finally made it to the last room. This room is surprisingly bright after all those nasty dark rooms, which honestly is kinda nice. Eventually, I made it to the Dragon Lord, who was just sitting there waiting for me. The Dragon Lord offered to let me join him in his conquest and he would share half of the world with me. Of course, I rejected his offer and he responded by calling me a fool. Time for the final boss. Honestly, this sprite isn't all that intimidating. I guess all that grinding paid off as I conquered him with ease. Or did I? That's right, this wasn't the Dragon Lord's true form. His true form is, surprise surprise, a dragon. I kinda got wrecked by this form. I barely did any damage and it felt like I was needing to heal after every turn. It didn't take long for me to run out of HP and get sent back to the starting castle. Yeesh, that was brutal. I guess I'm not done grinding after all. I spent another hour grinding, and all of this time spent fighting monsters made Dragon Warrior pass Mahjong as the new longest game in the challenge. It seems fitting that it was a grindy JRPG that pushed the challenge to new heights, doesn't it? It actually held this crown for quite a while, and it wasn't until a certain other JRPG franchise arrived that we would see this title dethroned. Anyway, after grinding some more, I got to level 19, which got me the final spell in the game. While I wasn't sure if it was enough, I decided to give the final boss another shot, just in case I could squeeze out a victory. This ended up being a pretty grueling fight. I was doing a bit more damage to him, but it still wasn't a whole lot. As the fight stretched on, my MP started to run short. However, just before it ran out, I did it. I conquered the Dragon Lord and retrieved the Orb of Light. With this in hand, all the shadows of the land were banished and peace was restored. When I came back to the castle, the king offered me his throne, saying it was my right to rule the kingdom. My character rejected his offer though, saying if he was to rule, he wanted it to be a land he discovers on his own. Just before leaving to find this new land, Princess Gwaelin arrived and said she wanted to journey with me on this adventure. I accepted her offer and once again picked up the princess into my arms. With that, the game ended and the credits rolled. Dragon Warrior complete. On to the review. While I definitely do like this one, this game kinda has first game in the series syndrome. Overall, I think the game did succeed in making a variation of RPGs that were more simplified but still enjoyable. The 1v1 combat is perhaps a bit more simple than I would like, although it does admittedly prevent battles from ever dragging on for too long. One thing in particular I like about this game is how you're able to go anywhere right from the start, even though you are still sort of limited based on how tough the enemies are. It still gives the game a sense of progression, but you're allowed to push forward a bit if you're willing to take the risk. Like that time I got Erdrick's sword early in the final dungeon. While I imagine some people won't agree with this praise, I quite liked having a world that was more open like this. If you don't want to push yourself too hard, you can always grind more before pressing onward, but if you are fine with trying to handle the difficult enemies, you can proceed forward whenever you please. Overall, I also surprisingly didn't hate the grinding in the game at first. During the early parts of the game, I didn't really mind having to level up a bit before moving on to new areas. It generally gave me enough time to learn exactly how each of the enemies worked, and it gave me the opportunity to strategize as to what was the most effective way to deal with each of them. However, I personally felt like the endgame grind was too much. Having to grind for hours just to stand a chance at the final boss quickly became tedious, and it was definitely my least favorite section of the game. I don't completely hate the idea of the game forcing you to engage in its core battle system to progress, I just think it should have been a bit better balanced, especially near the endgame. When I played the mobile remake on the Switch, I'm pretty sure they rebalanced this aspect of the game to some degree. However, I think the single worst aspect of this game though is probably its dungeons. The torch system just isn't really enjoyable, and there's nothing remotely interesting about the dungeons that make them fun to explore. I even generally like mazy labyrinths, but when everything is just the same windy corridors, it mostly just becomes tedious to explore them. Overall though, I think it's a pretty competent first venture out for the series, and I even prefer its overall map design to many other JRPGs. I just think it has a few key aspects that hold it back. In the end, I gave the game a 7 out of 10. I'd probably recommend trying out one of the later ports of this game, since I think they fixed some of the issues I had with the grinding. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to see more of these in the future, make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you won't miss out on the next one. Also leave a like if you enjoyed it, since it will help the channel grow and motivate me to continue this series. I hope I will see you in the next step of my quest to beat every Nintendo game.